Kia ora. Welcome, everybody. It's so good to see so many people. Thanks for coming. My name is Maya. I am a Managing Director of Aleph Accessibility, and I'm helping run this meetup. And it's really exciting to see everybody here. The meetup has been on and off for a number of years. I've been involved with it just for the last few years. And so we're kind of restarting it again this year, and just kind of trying to see what works with our community. And the whole idea is just to come together, share stories, share motivation, and just build a community in Wellington for digital accessibility so that we know we're not alone and that we can all work together to move this idea forward. So yeah, like I said, my name is Maya. We've got two really great speakers today. The idea that we had, so a group of us got together to talk about the meetup and just what we wanted it to be and what we want to look like. We didn't really know, and we're very open to hearing ideas. But one thing that we thought would be really valuable is real world stories and accessibility, like in the trenches and how it's happening in the real world. Because whatever your experience is, it can sometimes feel like you're on your own, and can sometimes you feel like you're on an uphill battle, screaming into a void, that kind of thing. And so we thought it'd be really helpful to hear some stories of success and what works, and have some insight about that. So that's what we're going to do today. We got two speakers with some great insights, and then we're going to do a Q&A panel as well afterwards. So yeah, unless you have like a really burning question that you have to ask it right then, we'll just save it for the Q&A if everybody's okay with that. But of course, ask your questions. It doesn't have to be like super formal. I'll just go through a list of things, and then we'll jump right in. So I just want to say thanks to a bunch of different people and groups that helped put this together. First off, Aleph Accessibility sponsored us with the food. So thanks so much, Aleph Accessibility. 257, this is the space that we're in. They're giving it to us free of charge. It's a beautiful co-work space. So we thank very much for them. We've got our volunteer committee. So along with me, we've got Michelle and Mark, who are doing double duty. They're both speaking and volunteering with us, so that's amazing. We have Charlotte in the back over there. She's gonna be taking photos. They're mostly gonna be like from the back, just to kind of show people how amazing and how much fun we're having. But if you don't wanna be in a photo, just let her know and she'll make sure to respect that for you. Anna is joining us online, but she's been helping us, especially with the graphic design and stuff. So all of that visuals is her. Thanks so much. Dave has also been helping us with really some nice insights, and Prey has been doing our tech as well. So thank you so much to the committee. You really help make the meetup happen. And also it's just like a lot more fun doing it together. So I really appreciate it. So we'll do, like I said, the Q&A. We created a Slido, but we're a pretty small group in-house, so I don't think we need the Slido necessarily. So yeah, when we get to the Q&A, we'll explain how it works with these mics and stuff like that. People online, you can write your questions, and Prey will be monitoring the chat, so your questions will get answered. There are snacks. Yay, there are drinks. Yay, there are stickers. Yay, you should get some, at least people in the room. People online, you can get your own snacks too. So help yourselves. I mean, if you want to stand up and go get, you can help yourself now. Between the talks, as well as like while we set up for the Q&A, is a good time to get up and help yourself. Make sure I don't leave with any of the snacks, please. So you're going to do me a favor. And then finally, toilets are in just behind this room. So if you leave where you came, but before you get to the elevators, you make a left turn, and then the toilets will be there. I'm pretty sure they're gender neutral ones, I think. Yeah, okay. People who work here know that. So yeah, so that's for you there. If case of emergency, drop, cover, hold, don't follow me. I'm not from here, but follow your common sense. And yeah. And then just for the building, the doors close lock at 6 p.m. So you're stuck. No. So just when we exit, we have to exit from Victoria Street, which, yeah, unfortunately might be inconvenient for those who came on Willis. But anyway, so I'll remind you again when we wrap up. That's everything. Okay, I didn't pull up the bio for Mark. I wasn't that prepared. Do you want to introduce yourself, or do you
I
want me
can
to
just introduce myself.
Okay,
That's
cool.
all right. Yeah.
Mark's been attending the meetups for a while now, and so it was really great that he raised his hand, both for volunteering with the group, and then when he also said he wanted to speak. That was really really cool to be able to hear all the things that he's learned from the group, and that also the things that he's been learning at his workplace and stuff. So that's really exciting. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Mark. If you want to stand here, might be
Yeah. Thank
nice.
you.
Cool. Give it up for Mark. Yay.
Cheers. Thanks for coming, everyone. It's a great turnout on a Monday evening, so it shows that you all really care. It's really awesome to see. My name's Mark. I work at BNZ as a front-end developer, and I came in about 6 years ago at the start of COVID, working on the design system team. So if you don't know what a design system is, it kind of provides the guidelines and tools to kind of deliver your organization's kind of digital design language, out to developers and things. And accessibility and usability is a big part of that, which is really cool. So I did that for about 4 years, which is really cool. And then last couple of years, I've actually been, out there in the trenches, as you say, building things both for staff and for customers. So it's kind of cool to see it from both sides. But I'd say my accessibility journey began in about 2013 when I actually started teaching myself how to make. I just wanted to know how to make a website. I thought that would be really, really cool. So what's the first thing you do? Go do an HTML tutorial. And I loved it. I loved how you could build a website, but also I loved the structure of the data. And then I was like, this can be interpreted by anything, not just a browser. It's information. You could have it read to you. You can have, like, I don't know, bots interpret it. It's just like structured data, and I really leaned into that, and that sort of, I think, sent me down the accessibility path quite a bit. Also that, you can create experiences that can be experienced through different mediums, which is really cool. Cool, and I feel like everyone here is going to know what accessibility is. That's probably why you're here, and you care about it a lot. So I thought, okay, what is it in my own words? With accessibility, it's practice of delivering online experiences that are able to be used not only efficiently, but joyfully by users. So keyword joyfully, regardless of background or ability. And another sort of quote here I've got is, it's not that a person is disabled, it's that the services that are being provided are disabling, which is a big thing I believe as well. So whose responsibility is it? Can we have any guesses as to which of these it might be? Yeah, of everyone. So we all have kind of our own roles to play, right? And we could almost look at this like a bit of a funnel. Like if you drop the ball here and the product's at the end, if anyone's kind of not quite doing their job in terms of accessibility, it will flow through to the final product, right? So for developers, we want to be doing nice semantically structured HTML. Designers want to be looking at things like, color contrast and user flows. Content editors want to make sure the stuff is easily digestible. Testers are probably going to check all of that and maybe run some automation. And then even at the top there with the product owners and managers, if they don't allocate us time to do that work or don't prioritize it, then all of that's almost redundant anyway, right? So yeah, we all have a part to play. Next. Okay, so I noticed after I created it, this looks like a giant eyeball. Sorry about that. But just what I wanted to illustrate here is, yeah, basically this is us, right? This is who we are in our lives, in our organizations, and I guess the start of our influence. And it's one thing for us to individually make an accessible experience, but if you think of one person in an organization, there's only so much you can do, right? There might be 1% of the services that would be accessible. So what we really need to do is kind of expand the circle of influence of it. So, from ourselves out to our team, organization, and then, even out where we are now, out in our community, in our city. So I've come up with a bit of a 4-step process. This is what I've used personally. Nice and easy. system. So obviously beginning with ourselves, I would say most people here, already would create accessible work because this is why we're here. We kind of care about it a lot. And then we want to start expanding that out, right? So expand to like our team and then, cross teams. And then, eventually we can become a bit more of an advocate, a teacher to try and get the thing organization-wide. So starting with ourselves. So what might that look like for developers? Obviously, we want to make sure everything's kind of up to scratch in terms of, the HTML, heading structure, form labels, ARIA patterns, that kind of stuff. Designers, same as I said before with the contrast and, user flows. And also the product professionals and managers, making sure that they're sort of checking it, at the end and also allocating time for it. So trying to remember what I've written here. So now we want to start bringing it out to our team, so we can demonstrate it how it kind of works, and also just trying to like share your passion with, because your team members will care about it if you show the results of it. And also we can bring it in with things like code review. So if you see some code coming through that maybe is ignoring it a bit, be like, hey, just, you could make this more usable for a lot of people if you, use this ARIA pattern, or if you use this, semantic HTML. Cool. And now we're going towards sort of cross-team tools that kind of scale a bit more. Like, how can we do this? So obviously, a design system is the one that I've been focusing on a lot. This won't solve all your problems to do with accessibility, but what you can do is make it a bit easier. So in your documentation, you can have a little area for it and be like, here's some really cool resources. Here's how you can learn about it. But also, if you have a component library, make sure it's got all the properties that they might need. And React is really great for this. If you use TypeScript as well, you can have some enforced kind of properties, like labels, for example. And beyond that, just try and spread the word a bit. So, kind of like how we are here, you can go to meetups if you have them at work. At work, we have these things called guilds, where you can actually go along and talk about anything you want. So if you have a guild for developers, particularly front end or design, that's a really cool thing to do a demo at, and maybe show how you've turned something, made something more accessible. And now we come to the challenges. And it can be quite hard sometimes. I remember a few times, in the past few years, thinking oh, I'm really just kind of talking to a brick wall here. But you just kind of need to, carry on and believe that you are making a change. And even it kind of sucks, you do it anyway, right? So start small. If you send someone to go and look at the WCAG guidelines or the YRA guidelines, you're probably going to get nowhere with that. A developer is going to be like, I'm not going to read this massive. Has anyone seen what they look like, how long they are? Yeah. And I've seen people try to do this in the past, and it's no. Just start simple. There are some really handy resources for starting small. There is one, I think, on the WAI start, which is basic checks. And it's a nice short page. It focuses on just the real basics, heading structure, alternate text for images, form labels, that kind of stuff, just the real basics. And I honestly feel like if you just get that bit right, that's about 80% there, right? There we go. Yeah, Pareto principle. 80% there with 20% effort. The other 80% of the effort is reading those guidelines. But I would say, don't bother reading them, unless there's something specific you're looking at. For example, over the past couple of years, I helped to build I think a tooltip component and also a combo box, and that's when you can actually go into those guidelines and be like, okay, what's the specifics here? Retaining knowledge is quite hard. Usually you have people and advocates that are very, very good at it, and they kind of drive the stuff. And then when they leave, there's a lot of knowledge that is just gone. And things can be just forgotten, and nothing is prioritized. So we need a way of kind of retaining it. So I've got a few ways to do that here. Making accessibility part of onboarding. The easiest way to do that is if you do have a design system, you could add that as part of the docs. Be like, yes, this is how we build things. Here's your component library, and also here's how we make things accessible. Yeah, having a knowledge space there, and also just make it easy to deliver them by default. I kind of don't like this word by default because you can't just be like, we use the component, therefore it's accessible. Not like sometimes, not necessarily. It depends on the intent, and you still need the user to provide like the right label. Yeah, getting it prioritized can be hard because if you work in a fast-paced environment with maybe a bit of a pushy product owner, it's all about the next feature, next feature, next feature, next feature. And so if you notice any accessibility issues, it's quite hard to actually get them prioritized. One way I've found to combat this is to treat them as bugs, not enhancements. If you treat it as an enhancement, like, oh, this is an enhancement, it's going to make things better for people, it'll get pushed way down the stack, right? If you say it's a bug and you put a ticket with a little red label on it, bug, product owners hate that. business analysts hate seeing the red. They want to get it's that kind of mental kind of get the red out. Get the bugs out. So if you treat it as like an actual usability bug, do that, and then it's much more likely that you'll actually be able to get to do it. Obviously, and if you're developing something new, cool, that's great. You can make it accessible from scratch. Getting funding for audits also can be quite hard. I've been quite lucky that work has been good at this. But I know a lot of places, it can be very, very difficult, and, screaming into the void, like this stuff is important. But yeah, I mean, you could create a business case. It's up to them as to whether they'll take it seriously. But one thing that I like to stress is the cost of doing it versus the cost of not doing it, right? There's a monetary cost potentially in doing it, but there's almost like a, not monetary, but it's like a intrinsic cost of not doing it. If you think of like a reputational damages, if somebody can't, access their bank accounts, that's bad. Bad news travels much faster than good news. So there's a cost of not doing it. And also that it is, it's a basic human right and the right thing to do. I know a lot of, well, pretty much all of public services, I think, are all enforced to be, I think, WCAG 2.1 or 0.2. But for private companies, there's nothing really, there's not a lot of, I don't think there's legislation kind of holding that up too much. But that could change in the future, and that will change a lot of unplanned work. It will create a lot of unplanned work if that comes into effect in the future. I think, how am I for time? Did I blitz through that? I have no idea. Yeah, yeah, so this is kind of the end of my talk. If I have time, I could maybe give you a couple of real life examples of some accessibility fixes. So obviously we have a design system, and in that design system, we have a lot of like icons, right? And icons can mean a lot of different things. And we had an issue when I first started that these icons weren't getting labels by the developers. I personally said, okay, that's cool. We can maybe have like, a prop on that that says it's required. But what ended up happening was we were to come up with a whole bunch of default labels for all of these icons. So I was like, okay, default labels. You have quite a few different labels for certain icons, right? What if we have an X icon? Like, what does X mean? Does it mean close? Does it mean X? Does it mean don't do this? it really depends on the intent, right? And so having default labels actually ended up making things less accessible because we ended up having like, I think it was clothes, and you'd put it next to something else. And so the way that read was close this, when really I think it meant to say don't do this. So yeah, thankfully that's not the case anymore, and they now default to, I think, presentational. So if you just load it in, it'll be presentational. You know, the ARIA tree, if that makes sense. But if you put a label on it, that is the label. So that's kind of a real life example of something we managed to fix. Yeah, I think that's about all I have for you. Sorry, it was a little bit ad hoc. Thank you very much.
Okay, keeping it rolling. We've got Michelle DeBess. I actually don't know how to pronounce it. DeBess, it is, okay. Is the Experience Design Manager at Open Polytechnic, providing UX leadership across the organization's digital initiatives and its learning management system, iQualify. Michelle champions inclusive, outcomes-driven ways of working that integrates accessibility into delivery, operations, and everyday decision-making, making it business as usual rather than a specialist add-on. Please welcome Michelle.
Thank you, Maya. Thanks, Mark. I swear that Mark and I didn't look at each other's presentations, but a lot of common themes I'm sure you'll see as we go through. But yes, as Maya said, I'm Michelle DeBess. I head up the Experience Design team at Open Polytechnic, and I'll just go like that. Okay, I can see this all right. So just a bit of background on Open Polytechnic. It's New Zealand's largest provider of online distance vocational education. We also have our own learning management system, and that's called iQualify. So that is actually the platform that all of the learning is built upon. So I also wanted to give a big shout out to my team, so the Experience Design team. So we've got Stephen there, he's a UX lead, myself, Anna M and Anna D, who are both digital and UX designers, and Gillian, who's also a UX lead. And I wanted to thank them very much because all of us really, embrace accessibility. It's at the heart of what we do. Our team mission is to empower ākonga and kaimahi, so learners and staff, to achieve their goals by embedding user experience into the design, development and delivery of all products at OP. So yeah, that's for us, user experience accessibility is at the core of what we do. We're big proponents, I guess, of UDL, Universal Design for Learning. So for us, an accessible experience is actually a fantastic experience for everybody. So I thought I'd like to talk about, where we started, but I thought I'd just go a couple of years ago, and I'm sure a lot of us have been in the same place. Accessibility was a little bit like a checkbox exercise. So the digital designers, we had Figma plugins for accessibility. Our developers were using browser extensions, and our product manager had accessibility as part of acceptance. So iQualify works in a lean, agile model, and so the product manager was responsible for accessibility at the end. And what this looked like to them was, running a browser extension like DevTools and looking for kind of serious or critical issues. But what made me sad was that design reviews were done post-acceptance. So what that meant was that my digital designers, they didn't really feel very empowered to kind of, put up their hand and say, hey, this isn't very usable or accessible. So we needed to lay a new foundation, to bring accessibility to the fore. And so the first thing we did was bring design reviews before acceptance. So I worked with the head of product and head of delivery to try and get that buy-in and bring those design reviews right up in the development process. I also empowered the digital designers to own accessibility. And what that did was it actually alleviated some pressure from the product manager, because they didn't have to worry about all of those accessibility checks anymore. So, we're still working in a checkbox model here, but we're starting to make some progress, and we're really starting to bring accessibility much further up in the development process, toward the beginning. And then kind of aligning with what Mark has been saying today, we helped others access and apply what we know. So for the designers, that meant kind of talking to developers and giving them documentation that they could relate to. So yeah, like you said, not just linking to WCAG guidelines. There's obviously many other documents out there like Mozilla Dev Docs, Angular Material, which I qualify as built on Angular Material components. And so, we started kind of sharing knowledge, and I think we started to see some real benefits with that. So we're still building on our knowledge. And the next thing we did, we expanded our acceptance criteria. So initially everything was under what's called technical acceptance, but we added in a design component, and that actually covered UI, UX, and accessibility. And I've got an example a bit further down the track to show you. We found too that our accessibility testing evolved by building on our knowledge. So we started, broadening out from, just checking the colours and those types of things to, making sure that things were keyboard able to be navigated on a keyboard. We introduced a lot more assistive technology testing. So using, like your Microsoft VoiceOver, Windows Narrator, NVDA for screen reader tests, for example. And we also started looking at third-party tools, so tools like Browser Stack. So we do a lot of responsive testing with that. So that's on devices and browsers. And so, we're kind of learning and keeping evolving in this space. We also started to use data to inform our decisions. So at Open Polytechnic, we have one directorate, and that's all about data. Oops, I'm going to trip on that. I knew that. So they know data about everything, right? So they, we've got over 60,000 learners. And so what we did was we started to work with them on just kind of unpacking what our learners look like. And I've just put up a slide there for disability types. This was over a period from 2024 to midway through last year. And we know that our learners with disabilities have increased, and they currently sit at around 8% of our learners. So, they're significant. And I think as a designer, it's really interesting to know too, just how it's broken up there. You can see there's a large amount of learners that are dyslexic. So we need to be mindful of that when talking about fonts, for example. And we carried on building knowledge and, doing a lot of collective learning. So we started to hold a lot of workshops actually and kind of presentations. And we invited people, disabled people from the community to come and talk to us about, how they use some of our products. What else did we do? We started testing early. So we were starting to kind of have those conversations before anything was built as well. So that's between, kind of bringing in that UX part of things, but actually testing with people with lived experience. And it has been absolutely invaluable. So I just want to talk to a couple of success stories here. So dialogues. So we're talking Angular Material dialogues, which, can be called modals. So our usability testing finders found that when you opened one up, that focus was trapped within the dialogue. So what that meant was that certainly for assistive technologies, the header, for example, mightn't have been read out. So hopefully so here's an example here of just what it looks like. And this is an example from the story of kind of what we did under the accessibility acceptance, which was, a two-way conversation initially between the designer and developer to try and get that working. So we found that by adding some extra area labels and basically going into the mat config file. So basically when you use Angular Material, it comes out of the box. And it is accessible to a degree out of the box, but as I said, the focus is trapped within the dialogue. So by unpicking that a little bit further and seeing what we could do within that config file, we managed to get it able to be read by a screen reader. So a little success there. Another one is angular material dropdowns. So we found that they weren't able to be accessible with assistive technologies. So what we did was we changed them to native HTML. So, you know, visually it doesn't look quite as nice, but it's really functional and works really well. So, you know, back in the day, I don't think we would have got this past, you know, because everybody was, you know, it doesn't look very nice. But it was really great that, you know, we're kind of finally in this space where we can kind of make that change. So, yeah, it's good to see. So we've kind of been building this knowledge. And so, you know, how do you apply that to new contexts? Well, kind of toward, I guess, the middle of last year, we had a restructure in our digital directorate. So what that did was it brought together two teams. So one from Open Polytechnic and one from iQualify. So with UX and digital design. And as a new team, so we called ourselves the Experience Design Team, we kind of got together and we thought, what drives us? And so what I wanted to talk to today, we set ourselves a set of principles here, but it's this design for everyone here, because that's very much fundamentally at the core of what we do. So again, all about that universal design for learning and with accessibility as a core focus. Another thing we did was we wanted a design framework. And, you know, there's many out there. There's a double diamond. I'm sure you're probably all familiar with that. But we wanted to create something that was our own. So we pulled out bits and pieces from all of them. And, you know, it's funny, they still end up looking kind of the same. But we created a little story around it because we wanted people to remember kind of what we do. And so it became the honeycomb framework. I think actually one of my team drew this really cute little bee. And so we just kind of picked up on that and it kind of grew from there. But tonight, I'm not going to talk about the whole framework, but I really wanted to draw your attention to the align and discover phases, because that's where we are starting to drive accessibility from these days. So we've kind of brought it right from that checkbox at the beginning, you know, right up the other end of the scale to the very, very beginning now. So I think that's pretty cool. And I'll just talk to these a little bit more. Oh, sorry, I'll go back one. Yeah, sorry. So if we talk about that first honeycomb alignment, for us, that's about, you know, having a look at, you know, our strategies that are out there. And I think sometimes that's a good place to start too, if you're finding it trouble having buy-in. I find that people find it really difficult to argue with some of the things like we've got here at Open Polytechnic. So we have a digital strategic plan, and in that it actually specifies that all of our digital products should be accessible. We have an Open Poly strategic plan, and then we also have an Open Polytechnic disability action plan. And what that is we've kind of created a group, an advisory committee from people across multiple directorates at Open Polytechnic, and we're kind of coming together to work out how we can improve learner success, particularly for disabled people in this case. So it's pretty powerful, right? And it's really nice just to see everybody kind of on the same page across the organisation. So I've got Lauren here tonight. She's on the committee with me, so thank you, Lauren. And other things I think that you can draw on too. I mean, in tertiary education, we have TEC, you know, have standards that we need to uphold in terms of accessibility. But if you're not in those spaces, obviously the New Zealand government web standards are really good to draw on as well. And they have their own web accessibility guide, which, you know, I'm constantly referring to. It's pretty useful. So another success story, kind of coming together in this new world where we're bringing usability and accessibility testing right up front, is what's called IDAM. So that's Identity Access Management. And what that is we're looking at moving to passwordless log-on for our learners at Open Polytechnic. So it's in pilot at the moment. And what we wanted to do right up front before we did anything was just to check, could a blind learner, in this case, set up Microsoft Authenticator on their phone using a temporary access pass to log into their learning environment. So in terms of instructions, they were provided with a PDF via email, and this is what happened. Basically, we uncovered that special characters in the tab weren't able to be read by a screen reader. And PDFs, in this case, added extra spaces around the email address in particular. So it would read it out as new learner space test, for example. So all in all, the blind user couldn't complete the task. So that was invaluable learning for us. And we managed to pivot. We could provide a tab without special characters for anybody that needed it. And we certainly did away with the PDF and it became an HTML web page. So a good little success there. Another one more recently as well, SharePoint Style Guide. So again, just starting to bring accessibility out into operational context, right? And this is across the organisation. So all staff at Open Polytechnic are able to run accessibility checkers on their digital content. So for us, that's SharePoint and that kind of space. So, again, really, really powerful, using these baked in accessibility checkers. I don't know if you can see the little icon there, but that is, just an option available for all staff. And we're running on workshops on how to use that well coming up. Continuous improvement. It sounds like a lean agile thing, doesn't it? But yeah, so just to reiterate, really, we've got this Kamahi Advisory Committee for Akonga Whaikaha. So we're always, sharing ideas and teaching each other and just kind of brainstorming solutions for how to improve benefits for our learners. The digital accessibility community of practice, I'm sure a lot of you might be, call in for those sessions once a month. There's MBs behind it. And obviously this group here. And, there's many more groups out there as well, but this is just some of the ones that we use and we go to regularly. Oh, sorry, I'm not very good with this clicker, am I? So a few key takeaways from me. On the holistic side, I believe we've all got a role to play. Like Mark, I believe, keep raising awareness, right? Just sharing knowledge tonight, sharing our knowledge and findings among others, particularly at work, but also around us. And again, also like Mark, keep your goals realistic, right? So don't try necessarily to go hard out on, say, WCAG 2.2 triple A. Start, where it fits you. And a good way to do that is to have an accessibility audit, which I've included on this slide here. It gives you some quick wins, but it also can, help direct you on where to spend your spare time and resources. So I really recommend those. But also a key question to ask is, can anyone use whatever you're developing? So features, products, services. Everybody, actually, I really can't, this one is so important to me, involve users with lived experience in the feedback loop. Every single time that we involve people like this, we get feedback that's just so invaluable. We would never have been able to assume it. So really, really important one there. Bake accessibility into all your processes. So it doesn't just have to stop at design development, it's delivery, operations, governance, leadership. So all of the things. Accessibility audits I've talked to. Another one is seek out your strategic plans, right? If you need any extra buy-in, if you find that there's nothing in your strategic plans around accessibility, you can be the voice for that. So if you need some help with that, look to your legal compliance. In New Zealand, we have the New Zealand Bill of Rights, which actually stipulates that all content should be accessible. New Zealand government web standards is another good one again. And, there's also global accessibility regulation. So there's, there's a European Accessibility Commission, and they're all based on WCAG guidelines as well. So hopefully enough for you to draw on there if you need that extra input. I think that is me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michelle.
All right.
So we will, I know you have so many burning questions. I wrote down a few things. So hold on to them tight. Grab some snacks. We're going to, in the meantime, set up the chairs and everything. So like maybe 5 minutes. Snacks, toilets again are just behind. There are a few people who work here. So if you get lost, do you mind raising your hand? Or, okay, never mind. Don't ask them. They don't want to be asked. Take 5, talk to your neighbor. We'll set up here and then we'll dive back in. Thanks. So how it's going to work is we've got these mics for the people in the room. Because we have the live stream as well, we need to speak into the mics in order for the people online to be able to hear us. So we're going to have one mic up here, and then Prey is going to walk around with another mic. So just when you ask your question, just wait for her to give that to you, even though it's not actually amplifying anything in this room. That's what we need to do that. Cool. So, and yeah, like I said before, she's also going to monitor the online as well. So she's doing lots of duty. Cool. Well, thanks again, Mark and Michelle, for your talks. We were saying in the corner that I think they were really complementary to each other in like themes that came up similarly about sharing knowledge. I think in this same way, complementary because you're playing different roles as well in design and dev, and then in management and IC, like individual contributors. So I think there's a lot of complementarity happening there and different perspectives, which I think is really valuable. So I'll start off the questions, if that's okay, just to kind of get the room warm, and then we can pass it along. So across both of you mentioned like sharing learning and going across teams. So I was wondering if you can talk a bit about the value of working alongside other disciplines in doing accessibility and finding allies, whether that's one person or a whole team, and what your experience is with that kind of cross-discipline accessibility work.
Cool. Yeah, I can go. It's really awesome if you have the opportunity to do it. So obviously I used to work in the design system, so that meant I got to work with designers, content writers, UX researchers, and it was amazing because you can actually bounce ideas off each other. And if you have an issue on the dev side, you can just ping someone straight away. Like you sort of get to know them personally, and then just cuts down those, to use the jargon, feedback loops. But also like even now that I'm not in it anymore, I'm in a team. A couple of designers found out that I was going to be at this event, and they were like, "Oh, you should join our accessibility group." I was like, "There's an accessibility group at BNZ." So yeah, now I'm in that, and they invited me to come along and had a little session on the design system docs, and yeah, it's great. Like, yeah, it's really awesome. If it's very siloed and back and forth, like, yeah, there's so much opportunity to be missed here.
I mean, I feel the same. I think in our space, certainly kind of bridging that gap between design and development initially just made a world of difference. And I think we kind of both learned to understand each other. We're both, trying to do the same things. And I think now, obviously, that has become even wider. So, delivery are wanting to learn about accessibility. Product owners, have always been on board, but they're a bit more of a recent addition in terms of the Open Polytechnic side anyway, which works with Scrum Agile. So, and for me personally, I've found it's just been really lovely connecting with other directorates. So, just remembering for us, like I talked about, we can tap into our strategy and analysis team for all of that valuable data, which is like a, gold really, in terms of helping influence what we do. So it's really nice just having those connections across the board, all with a common goal. So for me personally, I'm really looking forward to seeing it part of our governance. Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
All right. We'll take, there's a question from online.
Cool. This is from Netta, and she mentioned that you have partially answered that question already, but I'm going to read it out so that we can fill the gaps. How do product teams ensure that accessibility remains a shared responsibility across the development and test teams, even with designers taking the lead? Because at times we see accessibility being treated as a design problem. So I think some of what you mentioned before, there's a governance, there's a support system. It's a very, I guess, proactive, if you were interested, come along with us type thing. But then there's a difference between that and accountability and making them be more interested. How have you approached that and what's been successful?
We'll get used to this. Well, I mean, I think for me, you need to have those conversations right at the beginning, right? So before you're even developing anything. And so that's quite often, you know, conversation between product and design. So product will come to us with the problem to solve. And then, you know, we start to think about what that might look like and bring in development into that as well. So yeah, for me, right up front at the beginning, in terms of accountabilities, well, as I mentioned with our acceptance criteria, we've made design responsible for that. So that seems to be working quite well for us. But, you know, obviously there's different ways to do that and it would depend on the teams. But, you know, don't be afraid, I will say, to change, you know, how things have always been. If you can think of a better way, or, you know, I quite like breaking up the responsibilities because I think that gives everybody buy-in into what you're doing. So for us, it works very well. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just talking to you before about Figma, and this has been a really big help with this problem of being able to communicate with designers about, you know, any kind of usability issues. There's usually, I mean, in the past, there's been a gap between, you know, the designer gives you the design and then the developer accepts it, and that's kind of it. I guess with these new workflows, with these new tools, you can actually have a conversation with each other, like on a design that's, you know, almost half done, and you can be like, oh, this might have some accessibility implications, or, you know, you don't want to push back like too hard because you can ruin their creativity if you say, no, that's too crazy. But you can be like, you can start thinking, oh, how can we actually make this accessible? Do I need to push back, or is this something that I can actually make accessible? But yeah, just try and have those conversations like as the work happens, rather than having like, you know, the entire work is done here and then the entire, you know, it's handed over to the dev and that's kind of the end. Yeah, like include each other. Yeah.
I'll just add one more thing. Actually, it just reminds me, another thing we've done is we've got quite a comprehensive review process, you know, in terms of code reviews and things like that. But before any of that, we have what's called a story check. So that's actually a really good time for our designers and developers to get together and just cover off anything that they mightn't be sure about, or any red flags, you know. So yeah, I mean, I think for us, because we do work primarily with components, unfortunately we don't get all of that creative freedom, you know, so really it's about, you know, making it work in the best way possible. So that's why I said, you know, have a look in those config files and see what you can change for the better. Don't just believe everything out of the box.
Nice. Do you have any questions from the room? Yeah, Prez. Oh, you already have.
He was first.
Does he have a mic?
Hi, can you just elaborate on how you use Figma, and from what you were saying before? Because I'm a developer,
yeah,
and like I know what it is, and I look at the designs, but that's about it. And I know there's a lot more features in there.
Yeah. No, that's good. I honestly don't know a lot about it, but I think that says how good it is, and that I can still kind of use it. Normally, we'll have a designer working on a project. So, for example, I've been working on an appointment booking one pretty recently, and so we had a designer assigned to that. And so, yeah, there's a Figma kind of board space where they have all the designs with all the screens, and they literally just send you the link. And I've had no problem just going onto it, finding comments and stuff. Obviously, don't do any designing myself. And you know, you can click on things, and they'll tell you like the kind of the paddings and the spacings. I'm not an expert, but I can usually get the info that I need.
Is that integrated with your design system then? Because it'll give you like pixel gaps, but I'm assuming that's
It's not. I think they've looked at trying to do it in the past. So we have what's called design tokens. Have you heard of those? They're kind of like little variables that hold like CSS properties. So you could have like instead of like 4 pixels, you could have like a space. We call it space small, space medium, space large, that kind of stuff. A lot of that's not all fully integrated. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Sometimes you got to be like, okay, that's this. It's 4 pixels. I need to go find what the actual token is. Is a bit of a pain, but the idea is in the future, like, yeah, that would be cool if it could be integrated. Just not right now.
And then not the dev. You don't use the dev mode either.
I haven't used the dev mode, or maybe I have. I just don't know about it.
Okay. It sounds like you're in the same boat as us.
Yeah. It could be that.
Partial use.
Yeah.
I mean, we use dev mode at Open Polytechnic. So we have that design view and the dev mode. So if a designer wants to get a dev to comment, they'll send them a link to the dev mode, which just gives the developer what they need. So not all of the other things. And as designers, we like it because it means that if somebody touches something, it doesn't necessarily change, all of the design. So it is a really good feature. And we use the commenting tool, frequently. The team, kind of constantly kind of adding comments. For example, if you want to draw attention to a headline that used to be in uppercase, but is going to become sentence case, you can put a little note there and draw the developer's attention to it, and it saves writing it in the story. We've kind of gone full circle where we were documenting absolutely everything in the story, all of the labels, everything, to now, working with Figma, and now we're just kind of doing probably a bit more of a hybrid. So, half in the story and half with a Figma link. So, yeah, thank you.
Before I pass it on, just a warning for enterprise folks out there: the Figma license the default does not always include the dev mode. That's a separate license. So, hence, you might have a problem getting approvals there. I think next question.
Thanks. I was just keen to explore more around thinking about users with lived experience. So, could you unpack for us just how you've gone about sort of establishing relationships with those people, and I guess thinking about how have you gone about building in, if you're working with external users, remuneration for those people within the sort of budgets that you've been setting aside, or if it's internal, how you've gone about sort of establishing that within existing roles, just in terms of thinking about the labour involved in that.
In terms of participants, well, it's you cast your net far and wide, right? So you talk to people around you, where you've got, things called the daily news and things like that, where you can call for help. But also just through some of the groups, I mentioned before that digital community accessibility practice group. That's been really good to touch base with some various people. I'm sure some of you know Neil Jarvis. He's a blind user, so he's been fantastic, and he's kind of linked us up with other people as well. And then other things that we do too is Open Polytechnic, when you go into your learning, it's an environment called MyOP, and we can actually put alerts in there to ask for people that might want to come and help, with some testing, usability experience. And what we do is we say, okay, you apply here type thing, and we give a New World voucher. That's what we're doing currently at the moment. So we go in the draw for a New World voucher, and that seems to work really well. The last kind of call for help, we got, I think, over 600 people in just over a week. So it was pretty amazing, really. And, with your surveys, you can ask, do you want to be contacted, for some in-person workshopping or anything like that as well. So, we've built a pool pretty quickly, I think, and different pools for different things. So, so far so good.
Nice. I probably can't give you a straight answer for this one. We do have a UX research team. It's quite small. I think maybe 2 to 4 people, and I know they have like kind of like working groups and stuff, and they get like real users, real customers in to like test flows and things. But no, I don't have a direct answer for that one. Sorry, I'd have to come back to you after asking that team, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, Maya, do you have experience with that?
Yeah, so there's a few organizations that, like myself and a few other accessibility organizations, that we do that. So I connect with organizations, like, and yeah, get like find contacts kind of thing. And myself and other like accessibility services, like that's basically what we do. Some of them, some of people have a pool already, and some of us go out and get that pool of people for you, kind of thing. So you can do it yourself, like Open Polytechnic does, or you can find an accessibility like consultancy, and they'll kind of do that, the management of the finding the people, and then they'll profile, not in terms of like in a bad way, but like find the demographics that you're interested in to make sure that it's like you're hitting all of the different kind of demographics that you're interested in. Yeah, and then conduct the user testing on your behalf.
And they're usually when they go through agency, they're usually pretty clear on the pricing, because if it's concerned for all of you, right? Like, how much does it cost? I can't tell you up front, but if you go through an agency, they'll be like, if you want X number of users, here's the pricing quote. So if you're starting out, maybe and you don't have a captured audience like the Polytechnics, because nonprofit, etc., then perhaps an agency to start off with, and then you can work on your next path, then would work too.
Yeah, but it's good that you're asking about compensation as well. It's important to always compensate our users, especially if you're going for a niche group, that we want to show that we're valuing their knowledge. And so, yeah, compensating your users is really important. Yeah.
Just so that we're on the record here, if you are recruiting, like doing DIY, and you are paying users, just be aware that income tax and all that. So, perhaps other methods like gift cards, and, just be aware of that too while you're sorting yourself out.
There's a question right there.
Yeah, kia ora. I was really interested in the chart that showed before some of your audience, and obviously you've got an engaged audience and you've got a very diverse audience too. I'm just interested, a lot of the stuff we've been talking around accessibility is around sort of some of the more obvious or well-known, sight, motor control, those sorts of things. But now with things with ADHD, attention, deficit, anxiety-inducing interfaces, is there research going into sort of the usability concept of those into UX, not just the traditional sort of, sight, visual, contrast, those ones? I'm just, especially in the educational sector, that's, are you designing interfaces that are less or more geared towards some of the changing situation that people in Aotearoa face?
Certainly a conversation we're having, because you're right, that's what the data is showing us in terms of our learners. So yes, we are having those conversations. So I think for us, some of the next steps are adding people like that into our pool, and just making sure that we're consulting with them first up. And again, it depends what we're developing as well. So, if we're talking about the platform, for example, that would be a good space to start. But, this also encompasses the learning design itself. And so there's considerations there, how the learning's served up, and I think, we're just going to see, different ways that you can do that in the future. It becomes much more personalized. And, I'm kind of interested in, if there's little kind of things that you can give people to turn on and off, to help assist them with what they need to make, information a bit easier. I don't know if you've seen the Wellington City Library website, but they have this great little feature, accessibility feature, and you can just basically make their website, which is really interactive, and it has a lot going on, and it's beautiful to look at. But you can just turn it into black and white, and it stops all the motion. It's really powerful. It's just a tiny little tool, but so I'm really interested in exploring other ways that we can do that. And that, that's across the Open Poly website when you start your journey, trying to work out what you're going to study, to, your actual course itself, and so on. So.
Yeah, nice. We're really starting to try and introduce like preferences into user interfaces. So often we'll get really lovely designs and flows that maybe have some, animations and stuff that, look really great, but, not everyone's a fan of those. And so there's ways that we can introduce preferences. Like, I think definitely on Mac, there's a way that you can set a setting that says, I don't want things to be moving around. and you can hook into that like using code. I think it's called like prefers reduced motion. So we have quite a few components using that where we have sort of animations. But if someone's checked that, it's like, no, we don't animate it. It's just how it is. We've also been doing a bit of work regarding introducing a dark mode, which would be really cool. It exists, but it's probably unlikely that you'll see it on any products anytime soon. But it's just another thing that we would, it's another preference, right? If you don't want to be staring at a bright screen, you see something nice and dark, especially, at nighttime, it's a bit easier to look at. Yeah, those are a couple of examples. I hope that kind of answers what you're asking for. Yeah.
So we're talking a lot about, I guess, a graphical user interfaces, the brave new world of AI and chatbots and things like that. Are you guys exploring that area as well? And what does that mean for accessibility? I'm just going to improve it or make it worse?
Yeah, sure. Yes, we are exploring it. We've been looking at it in terms of can we automate, say, responsive testing, because sometimes that takes quite a long time to kind of go through, so all the different devices that you might want to look at and the browsers and how things are looking on those things. So, but to be honest, we haven't found anything that we're happy with at the moment. And I was talking to the team about this last week, and the feeling from them is that actually they really like the time that it takes to test stuff thoroughly and to get that feeling, when you're looking at something yourself on a device, get those flows and so on. And that's the same for our users. So, yeah, we are exploring it, but we haven't found anything that works for us yet, other than your plugins to Figma for WCAG, those types of things. And in terms of AI and UX testing, we still very much want to do that in person because we firmly believe in keeping humans in the loop. But we are open to automating some of our other processes. But at the moment we're still doing it ourselves.
Nice. I guess there's kind of two sides of it, right? There's kind of us using AI to develop accessible experiences, and also end users using AI to make their experience good. We're lucky that we have Copilot, which is pretty cool. You can use it to it speeds up quite a bit, but you need to be careful. Like it's it's what they say, it's a multiplier, right? You can use it badly, it's going to go really bad. Use it well, it's going to go well. I think AI overall is going to be good for accessibility for the most part, because you can use it to, summarize things for you. You can read entire web pages now when it's probably not even that long before we can even, go ask it to go buy us something. We don't even need to visit a website. We could, literally use voice to say, hey, I want you to go buy this movie ticket. Don't spend more than $20. And then, that's a massive win, right? Although one thing that's quite funny though that I will say about it is that ever since the advent of AI, now all of a sudden it's very important that our website, has a clear heading structure and has accessible text labels for things, because the AI bots need to be able to understand it. So that's a bit of a win for accessibility. But it's just kind of sad that it got to this to actually prioritize.
So your part of the answer explained a lot how your team is considering AI tools to enable. Have you got any more feedback on your user side on how they are struggling or finding it easier to then utilize your more accessible products with the AI tools?
Oh, sorry. Can you just rephrase that again? Sorry.
So we've heard about how you're using the tools, AI tools,
Yep.
to perhaps improve your workflow. You've
Yeah.
answered a bit on how your users are like, oh yeah, now because users are using chatbot, you have to make a more usable site. I'm just wondering, are there any more user requests, feedback, change of behavior that your team have had to adopt to because of AI changes? accessibility system user wise?
Not yet. We've not had any kind of particular requests come through. We have been doing some work, just what I just touched on, just to try and get the information on the website to be, I don't know, traversed by AI and like come up and if you ask a question like, give me all the credit card rates for banks at New Zealand, just so that our stuff will come up, because that's obviously what they really care about. But no, there's not been anything else beyond that at the moment. But I imagine it'll definitely be a thing in the future, like especially when it comes to like payments and stuff. And yeah.
We're probably a little bit similar in the fact that we haven't rolled out chatbots in that yet. It is coming, and the way that will work will be to help guide people. You want to come and study with us, what that might look like, from a program point of view, course point of view. So help learners connect the dots. But at the moment, kind of our AI and our automation explorations is kind of right back in the operational context. So trying to make other directorates across Open Polytechnic work in a better way. And again, we're probably a little bit similar to you, that everything's becoming about IA. So actually your structure of your information on SharePoint. So a lot of our projects revolve around that at the moment. So we're doing UX with that, but that's with ourselves, so yeah.
Michelle, this is going to bug me if I don't ask. What is a big blue button and why shouldn't we design it?
You do remember that? It was on the prezzo. Very observant, thank you. Well, that actually relates to not just designing what people ask for. Sometimes until you kind of unpack it, it actually might be something quite different. So yeah, we always say don't design the blue button because it might be something else that's required. So that's what that's all about. There's a whole presentation on it, but that's for another time.
Oh, did you want to go first?
Oh no. We have blue buttons.
Okay. Thanks for your presentations. They were great. Wondering if you had any insights around what works with leadership buy-in or decision maker buy-in, like what you found might be helpful, or what absolutely doesn't work.
Yeah. I've been lucky not to have to worry about this because our head of design and content is fantastic around this kind of stuff. We've had audits and stuff and had work prioritized, which is amazing. So I don't know if I'm the best person to even talk about this. But yeah, as I sort of touched on, think about, not just the benefits, but also like what happens if you don't do this stuff and you don't get this stuff right. That's what I would probably stress, which I don't know, maybe it's kind of sad I'm going for a negative angle, but I feel like that might work more with people that are kind of hard to crack or you part ways with the money. Yeah.
And I think for us, it's quite hard to argue with usability, evidence. So like our blind learner with the tap and the PDF instructions, it's pretty clear that that's not going to be, a workable scenario. But also, like I alluded to, I always, if you need some help with that, just look for your strategy. So have a look through, every kind of organisation should have some kind of strategic documentation and see if there's anything in there. And then, if you're in the business of education like I am, there's always, guidance there from TEC, for example, Tertiary Education Commission, New Zealand Government Web Standards. So, we can all use the New Zealand Government Web Standards. And then you could actually also talk to your, it's a legal right for people to have accessible content, for example. So it's pretty powerful and quite hard to argue with. But probably a bit like you, I've never had to really pull those out, but they're there,
Yeah, you could also try use numbers.
Yeah.
I kind of forgot about this before, but how some bosses might fight over like 0.5% of market share, you could say, well, I think it's at 17% of New Zealanders are disabled. So if you want 17% market share, make your stuff accessible.
Yeah. And one of the, to me, the whole point of this storytelling was to find success stories, and the fact that at a bank and an educational institution, they haven't had to have these convincing conversations. Why does a bank think it's a good thing to invest in accessibility? Maybe us as a small, whatever we are, maybe there are strong business reasons why a BNZ or an Open Polytechnic has invested in this kind of thing. Yeah. So I have one question, and maybe this could be like a good closing one. Both of you have mentioned goal setting, about being realistic. You mentioned like a 4-point plan even of how to set goals and set targets. So do you have tips and ideas and kind of things that somebody could take away of like how, leaving here tonight, like how am I gonna set my goals in a realistic, actionable way that still feels motivating? Yeah, what kind of goals can people set for themselves after this evening?
Yeah. So I always believe in starting small. So I don't know, maybe just share your little wins. Like if you made something accessible, this week or this month, just share it with someone. I don't know, and maybe talk to someone about it, or someone that you might think cares about this kind of stuff. Because you never know, who you're talking to, and who, how it might snowball eventually. Yeah, sorry, that's probably a very vague, very vague answer.
Not at all. I think, yeah, that's probably my biggest thing, given that we're probably all across different places of work. But, just, I guess, think about, that universal design for learning, and just how this isn't really just about disabled people. This is about, something that's useful for everybody in terms of what we're designing and developing. So I'm a big proponent of sharing knowledge. I think, it's really healthy. Get out of your silos. You might have people being experts of accessibility in the design corner and then over in the development corner, but, just connect together and share your learnings. And then I think it's even better if you can kind of, have some feedback at the end on how that was valuable for somebody using the product or service or feature. So bringing in that kind of UX component, usability testing. I love it. It's great.
Cool, thanks. No, that was both really good feedback. A big thank you again to Mark and Michelle for their insights. I really enjoyed that and got a lot out of it. I hope you did as well. So just to say thank you again to Aleph Accessibility for sponsoring, to 257 for hosting us, the volunteer committee, Michelle and Mark, Charlotte over there, Anna, Dave, and Prey really made this happen. You as well for coming in on a Monday, for those who joined us online. It's been really fun. I hope you took a lot out of it. Feel free to connect with anybody and everybody in the room. Let's stay connected with each other on like LinkedIn or whatever your preferred channels are, kind of thing. We'll be here for a little bit because there's still some snacks left, so you're not allowed to leave until you finish them. Yeah, but if you have, this is one idea that we had of let's do some talks and some panels, but we're open to different formats and different topics. So if there are any topics or formats or ideas that you had, or you want to join us to help organize things, please do reach out to any of us, floating around, or talk to your neighbor or whatever. But yeah, we would love to hear your ideas, because this is all about our community and making things that are interesting to us that we'll enjoy together. So thank you once again. And we'll hope to see you again soon.